change to winter again, which will fade out. But if you're in the body, you'll see the bones slowly come to dust. I went into this work a few weeks ago, and I came out not with the feeling of longing that I'd had with osmos, but incredibly joyous, because here was art. It can't be called by any other name. It's art, and it's a joyous art. It's a playful art. It's an art that's inviting you into it, not merely to observe, but to participate in the being, to participate in Char's vision for what's going on in the world. And I think she is the first, and she's really an exemplar. And fortunately, she's had the position and the opportunity to work in this environment, but everything that she's done will be able to do in a Nintendo 64 in 2 years' time. And with good enough tools, a 12-year-old should be able to do it and send it across the internet, and I will be able to stand inside of someone else's head. And this interface, for all of its advancedness, really just comes out of a desire to be simple and effective and in the body, and costs $5. So none of this is rocket science. It's always a question of intent. And her intent and integrity as an artist was to throw away the Cartesian, to throw away the hard edge, to throw away the solid, and replace it with a space that allowed you to be inside of it, that respected you as an individual inside of a world of her own creating. So you don't feel like you're a visitor. You feel like you're part of it. That work, those two works, and T-Vision, which we talked about, I believe, this morning, stand out to me as examples of what I call vivogenesis, which is the ability to evoke the positive, the affirming, things that would reify the existence of the self, even if that's a multiple self, things that won't cause it to be pulled apart willy-nilly. Things that allow you to stand in the midst of the flow of information and not be overwhelmed by it. And it's certainly my own desire to be able to see other works like that happen, to actually work on works like that, and hopefully to inspire you, if you're working, to work on works like that, to remember your humanity when you work in the virtual. To remember that what you're doing has a profound effect on other people, because you're really getting into other people's heads. And not only that, they're getting into yours. And someone said to me once, it's a good thing that Char is a profoundly ethical person. And you can tell from the quality of her work. If she were Leni Riefenstahl, this would be a very different world. Do you want to take it for a little while? Yes.
For those of us who couldn't stand to wait for 2 years for this to come to our neighborhood video store, are they available to be seen still at the Vermont?
If you go to, it's in Ottawa. It's in the National Gallery in Ottawa to September 7th.
And how about the T-Vision?
T-Vision is installed at, I think it's at Art Plus, but I think it's at the thing in Linz. Who's in
Oh, the Ars Electronica.
Ars Electronica in Linz. But if you look for Art Plus Com on the web, you will find pages that point to it.
Doesn't Char have plans to take the camera to the West Coast?
It's a good question. Osmos has been shown around the world, but it has not been shown on the West Coast. It's been shown in New York, in London, in Manchester, in Monterrey, Mexico, and I believe in Tokyo. But it hasn't come to the West Coast of America. Mostly it's because it's an expensive installation, because it does require a silicon graphics supercomputer, which has to at least be rented for the duration of the exhibition. And also because the technical requirements, most museums are set up to show paintings, and that's just the fact of the situation. And so the museums have to really build a gallery space for it. Now, the gallery space, if it's well constructed, uses a shadow box. You can actually see in shadow the human form that's moving. So the participant, the immersant, and she's created this word, I think it's actually a really nice word, the immersant in this immersive virtual space is illuminated behind a shadow box. And in fact, you can see projected on a monitor, or actually projected on a large screen, what this person is experiencing. And it's nice because you can watch the poetry between the motion of the immersant and the visual of what's being created. And in fact, I saw very clearly with Ephemer, which is a much more complex work than Osmosis, that I saw a number of people go in it. I never saw the same thing twice. It was always so rich and so varied and so dynamic that in fact these environments created, I mean, occasionally I was sitting in the room and a gasp would go out from the room because someone had stumbled onto a scene in there that was just breathtaking because of where it was being viewed and how it was being viewed, and it was temporary, it was all ephemeral. But for that moment, you were opened onto a scene. So it takes a lot of work on the part of the museum. Most museums are not particularly technically capable. The National Gallery was very good, actually. But many museums, even modern art museums, aren't capable of really dealing with a supercomputer installation and an immersive installation.
What's the status of virtual reality art on the internet?
That's a good question.
Scott Young.
Scott Young.
So
Yeah.
that's not the nicest virtual reality art on the internet.
Well, it's not where I would like it to be. My axe to grind, I am not blessed with a good visual ability my own self. I would love to say that I was a visual artist, but it just ain't going to happen. And a lot of people who are visual artists will work for, say, filmic media. And the difference between, say, working for film and working for a real-time medium such as virtual reality is that quite often in real time you have to design images that are much more concise, much simpler. You can't do Titanic, for example, and expect it to run on your home computer. So a lot of the artistic talent has been pulled, in a sense, toward the money and toward the recognition, which is in this very high definition, high resolution virtual art. However, a number of people, and Owen, if you want to throw up any names too, have made real headway. An artist that I've worked with for the beginning, he was the first artist to work in VRML and did all of my sacred work for me. He designed a gallery of sacred objects, an altar and whatnot. Has done a lot of work, and what he actually ended up doing was almost resorting to Celtic knotwork. And some of his works are in fact Celtic knotwork. But the interesting thing about it is it's Celtic knotwork that's being projected to 3 dimensions. So it's got a quality of dynamism as you're viewing it, in the fact that the quality of the knotwork will change through time. So it's got this quality, and part of the reason he did that is because flat surfaces, simple flat surfaces, are so easy for the computer to display that you can have many of them. So you can have these very complicated forms and still not overload someone's computer, because again, with the internet you're dealing with the fact that there's a wide range of machines and a wide range of capabilities.
One of the things too about virtual reality technology as it stands right now, really, I believe that virtual reality technology is destined to disappear. Its illusion, the illusion about it, the trick about it is that it does a disappearing act into the corpus of the operating system, and that it's going to wind up, the kind of windows and widgets and closed boxes and choice picking systems that we see in applications now will move into a situation where the entire desktop will be a 3D environment. If you look at that screen at the front of the monitor as the looking glass interface that you go through when you go through to cyberspace, there's cubic foot behind it that you can use. And if you have good simple 3D rendering technology, visual rendering technology, you can make use of that space and start to use just a simple mouse to be able to pick things out in that 3D environment behind there.
What kind of bandwidth are people going to have for these things to be compelling?
It's always as much as you can get your hands on. That's always the answer for anything that has to do with bandwidth. For the most part, Most of these are concise enough that they work over with people with normal modems. Part of the reason being that if it's not something that can transmit concisely over a normal modem, by the time it gets to your computer, it's too unwieldy for your computer to display well. That brings me to it. One of the other more interesting projects, which is sort of at a crossroads between art and artificial life, is what's called the Biota Project.
Yes.
And the Biota Project allows you to use genetic algorithms, A life, to actually grow plants inside of a virtual environment. So you can actually more or less genetically design a plant or an animal with particular characteristics, and it will grow on your computer right there according to those particular evolutionary characteristics. And this is biota.org if anyone is interested, and I can give that to you later as well. So that, and these forms, as you play with them, they're not deterministic. It's not like you're going to get the same thing every time, because they're subject to all sorts of constraints of growth. And they actually have established what they call an island, which is running on a computer somewhere, where there are all these different forms of A-life running in an environment where they're subject to selection pressures and breeding. So they're actually creating new forms of life which are not predictive, because these forms of life are interacting with each other and interacting with a larger environment. And quite often the constructions that arise from that, I think they have insects, I'm pretty sure, and they have plants. I don't know if they have any sort of higher animals, because those are relatively difficult to interpret and model. But these forms can actually have an incredible beauty on their own, in part because most of them are based on L systems and fractal mathematics of growth, so that they have this intelligibility which allows you to recognize them as being near to the living, but still a beauty in their form.
And aren't there also programs that somehow sense where your attention is in the virtual reality and compute outward from the attention point? So the part of the reality you're not looking at isn't drawing processor time.
That's polygon calling and foveal rendering is the other thing, which Eric was big on. Eric Gullickson was big on. Yes, exactly. And this is then using the computer technology to sort of trick your perception, because really, almost everything out of the center of your perception, your fovea, you're not actually seeing. It's all memory. It's one of those things we've learned from perceptual psychology. And if it's all memory, and it's a virtual world, and you've been there before, the computer doesn't need to waste much time on it. Now, it's a technique that, although it's well understood, is not often implemented in the kind of computer software that you'll see on a personal computer. You might see it on a workstation, on a graphics workstation or a graphics supercomputer. I can't give you a good reason for why that is, other than I think programmers are lazy.
Where are we here? It's 5 of 9.
Okay, so let me take off on the last one.
Yeah, why don't you do your...
Okay, so the last part of our unscheduled tour of the numinous, we're sort of tracing a personal chronology of mine, and we came to about 1993 when the whole web thing was happening. And in late 93, I took the work that I was doing in virtual reality and sort of spliced it with the work that I was doing, or the fact that I thought the web was a cool thing, and presto, abracadabra, we got VRML. And the thing that I think was important to VRML, the reason VRML, anything ever happened with it, was, and I hope this is the case, was because we didn't immediately say, me, it's mine, I'm going to patent this, you'll never be able to use it unless you pay me lots of money. Because Tony Parisi and I did this in our respective living rooms over the matter of a couple of weeks, and it was very simple, and we did it. And we decided he didn't think it would be worth anything. He was just a programmer. He says he was doing this to humor me. and over a few weeks' time, we got the basic work done, and I fired off a piece of mail to a man named Tim Berners-Lee, who's the father of the World Wide Web, because he had a few notes on his web pages about the fact that seeing virtual reality on the web would be a really cool thing. So, hey, Tim, I know you've never heard of me, but I'm this guy, and what you've done with the web is really cool, and I heard you were doing some stuff with virtual reality, and well, we have this thing, and it's up, and it's running, and it's working, and it's cool, and just thought you'd want to know. Mark, get a mail back a couple of days later. Hey, Mark, that sounds really cool. We're having this conference out here in Switzerland in a couple of months. Why don't you do a little paper and make a presentation? Tim. I'm like, okay. So I do a little abstract. It gets accepted, and I find myself on a plane to what turns out to be the first International World Wide Web Conference. Who knew? They certainly didn't, because they were planning for 300 people and 800 people show up. And I want to tell you just one thing about that conference. The conference was held at CERN, which is the great big nuclear atom smasher in Switzerland, just outside of Geneva, and in the conference center there. And it was 600 people, and 200 people basically trying to get into every session. There were just a lot of people lurking around, probably sort of like this one. And I remember one morning there was one email terminal. Now, who thought of that? Okay, the first 800 webheads, and there's one email terminal. But there was one downstairs in the CERN offices that was unoccupied most of the morning, and so I would regularly make a trip in a half an hour ahead of all the rest of the delegates and run downstairs and answer my email. I was mailing Owen, and I was mailing other people just to tell them what was going on. And I remember walking in one morning, and over here were a group of Japanese people trying to banter with some Italian people, and some English people talking to some French people, and some South Africans talking to some, Germans. And I walk in and I said, "My God, it's Starfleet Academy." It was a really beautiful moment, because I realized that, in fact, from the beginning, it was a World Wide Web. So I presented a paper there, and the thing that we did there is we said, look, this is an idea, and this is a prototype, but this is not the thing itself. And I managed to meet there a very nice young man by the name of Brian Bellendorf, who had just started working for this new magazine called Wired on this new online thing they were doing, which would eventually become Wired.com. And he said, look, do you need some help? Why don't you set up a mailing list, and we can all talk about this more after the conference, because the paper generated a lot of interest. And I'll give you this space. The guys from Wired, they like helping up the net. They figured they're going to make money off of it. They might as well help out a bit. So we all trekked back to San Francisco, and we set up this mailing list. And I send out some postings to news groups on the internet indicating that this mailing list exists. And I figured I'd have about 50 people in 2 weeks' time, and we can settle down and have a nice conversation about what's going on. And I wake up the next morning, I did this on Monday, and I wake up on Tuesday morning, and there are 750 messages in my mailbox. And it kept up like that for 2 weeks. And by the end of 2 weeks' time, I had 2,500 people from around the world who were intensely interested in making this happen. And this is when I realized that what we needed to do was to let it all go. And I started practicing what in retrospect I now call the stone soup analogy. I had the kettle, I threw the stones in, I threw some water in, I said, who's got the chicken? Well, it turns out that Silicon Graphics had the chicken, and IBM had some carrots, and Sun had some potatoes, and pretty soon we had soup. And the nice thing about that, hopefully the object lesson there, is that if you leave yourself open for community in that connection, if you're not trying to hold everything so tight, because the operating theory was that if we did this and it worked, well, we'll all make some money on it or something, but we don't have to worry about owning things right away, because what's important is to get the work done, and there was a shared vision. Everyone who was involved because they were thinking this was a cool idea, and their minds were there, and their hearts were there, and their code followed. Just a little while after this, I had a visitor in San Francisco. My friend Ronan introduced me to a very interesting gentleman whom I've come to be very good friends with by the name of Phil Harrington. Phil Harrington was a doctor in Ireland for a number of years. But because of a psychedelic experience, or I guess probably an empathogenic experience that he had, he radically changed the course of his life, because he was a well-to-do doctor in London, was a millionaire, in Dublin, was a millionaire, had everything that he wanted, but he was profoundly unhappy. And one night, I don't know if it was his first ecstasy experience, and I agree with you that ecstasy has this diminishing return, but that first time and that second time, my goodness, you're gonna find your heart center just sort of pushed right open, and if you're ready for it, it's a great thing, and if not, then you probably need to take it again. And he has his biggest sort of estate house outside of Dublin, and he has this extremely intense ecstasy experience. And in the midst of this ecstasy experience, he starts to sing, and he doesn't even really know why or how he starts to sing, but the singing is bringing things up for him. The singing is a cleansing for him, and he's bringing up sounds and tones from places very deep inside of him. And it doesn't stop. Even after the ecstasy wears off, it doesn't stop. It's as if what he's connected to, what he's burst through to, is some connection to him and maybe something that's larger than him. And it's expressing itself in sound. It's expressing itself musically. Over a period of time, he, in some sense, I guess, codified it into something that he calls voce, which we'll be doing in just a minute. And the idea behind a voce is a set of toning techniques which can open you up emotionally. They can open you up, ideally emotionally, and they work on focusing tones on the chakras. And when it works in a group, and I sincerely hope that it will tonight, the effect is really very profound. You get a wonderful sort of connected feeling with the other people in the environment. When I had encountered this idea, it rolled through my head for a month or two. And I said, wouldn't it be interesting, since we've collapsed space, we've eliminated space, right? Speed is now light. You can be anywhere you want. Take this event that happens mostly locally, as it will happen tonight, and broaden it. And at this point, I had a flash. I don't remember now in retrospect whether it was psychedelically inspired or not. But I remember I saw that same world that I'd seen years before, but now it was singing. And I could hear it. And the singing that it was making was the sound of the people who were sharing this experience, unmediated by proximity. And I think that when we're in a search for forms that can reinforce the self, even as we encounter technology, this could be one of them. And so I immediately dreamed up a name. I decided it was World Song, because that was literally what it was representing. And Paul and I set to work on it. The technologies we've tried so far have not been up to the task, because we haven't had the tens of millions of dollars that it would take to create something that I think Paul and I would be satisfied with. But as experiments in the direction, I think everyone involved has been very pleased with the results. And the idea is that if we can have a kind of connectivity that's not just of the mind, but at the heart on a local level, why not try to extend that franchise to something that's more on a global level? You want to take it away, Paul?
Sure. I think James is going to help me out. Yeah.
And this is Paul Godwin, friend, confidant, etc.
I've asked James to do those of you that were at yoga this morning. James is a Kundalini yoga teacher, so he's going to help us to stretch out a little before we do any vocal work. It facilitates when you can sing now if you want. How are you doing? Okay. Well, we've all had a nice few moments here, so we'll get our blood moving. I'll introduce you to something called yoga aerobics. Oh, God. What's this yoga practice? Okay, so plant your feet on the floor. And inhale and stretch up. And wave your fingers. And exhale and bend down and touch the floor. While you're down here, let's hit it about 8 times like this. Come up. And everything's done to a beat of, to a count of 8. And flap your arms 8 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
7, 8. And let's see if you've got enough room. Run in place to the count of 8. And then bring your hands up and inhale to the right, to the left, to the right. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. To the other side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And again, run in place. And let's come and hit the ground again 8 times. And run in place. And let's take one more deep breath and inhale and stretch up. And then exhale and stretch. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. I think that a circle actually would be the best shaped toy. Yeah, we will be sitting, or if you prefer, you can stand behind the people sitting, but pillows are fine. They're actually great, a little bit of a pillow on your back. You got a big voice. You sit next to me.
Okay, so I got to be first.
All right, another big one. Let's see. Wow. We can do more than one circle. Actually, we can kind of more like huddle to get us closer together. That'd probably be better. So, yeah, concentric is fine. I think a group would be better than a huge perimeter. Or yeah, that's just fine.
A cloud.
We're back in semicircle. So Mark talked about Ronan bringing Phil around. I wouldn't mind for a second if Ronan's in the room. I've never actually heard how you encountered Phil, though I heard it might have been out at like a moon tide race in the desert or something. You got it?
You might get us out on Syrian version. Quite an interesting experience.
So I guess Phil actually is now a singer-songwriter, but he at this time, like Mark said, was a physician, very unhappy and successful. And Phil used Voce as what he developed into Voce became like a program for singing for non-singers, people who kind of thought they might want to sing or had never really had any musical training or background, but wanted to. And it begins, a regular Voce session will begin with something like counting, maybe spontaneous counting 1 to 20, and back down again. Meaning, so a group like us would count to 20. You'd sort of, if you felt the impulse, you'd say 1, and then he'd say 2, and so forth. So slight attunement, and then he moves on into a chakra toning, and then it generally moves on into a verbal, that is with words, a kind of a call and response type of work. My interest in it, really, I guess the first toning work I probably did was at some rainbow gatherings or something in like 1980 or so, and seeing 5,000 people just going home, on the 4th of July, generating huge circular rainbows was
30.
dandy.
30,000.
30,000. She went this year with 30,000. So anyway, I have been interested in the Voce work, and mostly the Voce work that we've continued to do has been related to the chakras. And so what we're going to do tonight is based on the structure of the chakra system, and we will do 7 tones, and each one can last from 3 or so to 5 breaths generally. I don't have a huge source of wind, so it takes me 15 of those. But whenever I'm with somebody, some big
Geezer.
blowers. Then and I say, oh, let's do 10 this time. I'm like, 10? If we did 10, it would take an hour. So so anyway, and that's what we'll do. And so I will do a short, little bit of guided meditation that will just kind of ground us in each chakra, and then I'll tell you the sound, and then we'll make that sound. Now, if you're all game, which I hope some, maybe a high percentage are game, we'll go ahead and try something a little different tonight, which I think we talked about would be really cool, which would be that I'm not, I think Mark as well, and Rona, we all talked about that we're not quite into the word-oriented improv of it, but we like the idea of improv of it. And so what I'd like to try tonight is that when we do a tone, I'd encourage you or welcome you to improvise on the tone just sonically. So you can sort of play with the sound, play with
Like a melody.
The melody, or play with the rhythm a little bit if you want. And I mean, if you really feel like you have to yell out a word, yell it. But the thing about this exercise will be that we're really going to be kind of making music here together. And so the key to making music is listening, and that means listening to yourself and making the sound that you really want to make. And if you don't feel like making a sound, don't make one, and otherwise be listening to other people, and if you hear something that inspires you, then go ahead along with it. Likewise, as in good improvisation, like jazz or any kind of good improvisation, we will let the improv take the course that it wants to take, and that will involve listening as well. So what we will do a chakra, and if it's going well, we'll just keep doing it, and and try to listen and think of it as a piece of music that you bought on a CD. And when do you want it to fade out? When you want it to fade out, you'll be participating in the fade. So okay, with less verbiage, maybe we can just close our eyes for a minute and get in a comfortable position. I also want to say that the tone that you sing is not, the actual tone, the note on the scale is not important that you sing the note that I sing or that your neighbor sings. The important thing is that the note that you choose resonates in your body cavity. And this is a great wake-up. It's really good for pre-yoga or after yoga. I roll out of bed and do a voce because the sound actually can sort of wake up parts of your body, and that's what you're kind of tuning for when you choose. So when you look for a tone, I might start a tone and say, ah, and you might go ah, and you won't really feel it in that chakra, but then move around, kind of go ah, oh, ah, and then you'll be ah, oh, I feel it in that chakra. So that's the one you should choose. Okay. So again, we'll close our eyes. Take a deep breath in. Exhale. Another one. And I want you to imagine that we are sitting on top of a huge ball in space. And we are rotating really quickly. And at the center of this ball is a fiery orb. So I want you to concentrate on that fiery orb that is many, many miles below you. It's it has a very, very dense mass, and we're going to imagine that our root at the base of, really at the between where you're sitting, is connected to that fiery orb. And I want you to imagine a deep red color, like a really dark red, like it's almost black,
And there are veins of energy between the center of the earth and your root. And the sound that we're going to use is ah. And we're just going to do some ah. Upward, and the color becomes a very warm and glowing orange, and the energy is swirling around your navel. And this chakra is where we will digest all that grounded energy from the earth, and we will use it to nourish ourselves and each other. And as it swirls, it will massage the inner organs, and it will allow us to digest, and there we will take in information and food and toxins, and we will just move them through our system and take what nourishment we need and expel the rest. And that rosy orange color will generate a sound which is the energy rises up to your solar plexus, and it begins to connect with a waterfall, like a white waterfall cord that's coming down the back of your spine. And that's really reaching all the way up into the cosmos. And in the center of your solar plexus is a yellow, like a white, almost a yellow white, like an eggshell. And this is the area which we use for our direction, and it's the cord which we follow. And when we're centered, it feels like a spindle around which our entire being can just, spin and rotate, and it's your direction home.
I've been doing boche skiing lately, and it's great. This chakra is terrific for skiing. It just lines you up with the direction, and you can tone on the downhill. So the sound here is a really kind of pre-verbal, kind of guttural sound. And it's not as sung as the ones we've been doing. And here you can spit out other phrases in a way, like kind of a venomous way, or if you want more direction, or if you're trying to protect your zone. Energy moves up to everyone's favorite chakra, the heart. And the color is green and surrounds your heart, and you know what that stands for. And the sound is very easy for it. Sound to remember. And Mark, I have that voice. When you say the magic word, say the word. Say the word.
You do the tone though.
Say the word and be like me.
Love.
Love.